Uncorked, the speaker series by Coriolis.
Shari Berkowitz is a professor of criminal justice administration at California State University, Dominguez Hills. Her program of research focuses on the intersection of criminal justice, psychology, and law, with particular research interests in eyewitness memory, false confession, and the causes and consequences of wrongful conviction. And her talk will be titled Eyewitnesses in the Courtroom, Myths and Consequences.
Mistakes happen. We've learned, of course, that memory is reconstructed, and that's a big reason why these mistakes occur. Sometimes people have myths or false ideas about memory. Instead, what we know about memory is that it's reconstructed. Our memories in our brains are not just like set there, static, unable to change. And same for me, and same for you, and same for everybody. And that's why every time you remember an event, it's going to be a little bit different. And that's also how we see how these false memories can occur. Of the first 375 that were proven innocent through DNA evidence, we know that those men and women served over 5,000 years in prison. Actual time served, not sentenced, served. Over 5,000 years in prison collectively. We go after the wrong person. That means the real perpetrator is still on the street. And we know from those 375 DNA exonerations that if we hadn't gone after those wrong innocent people, over 150 violent crimes, murders and rapes would have been prevented. Just because someone is confident doesn't mean it's necessarily a correct memory. We find in our false memory studies that we make people remember things that never happened, and they can increase their confidence in those things that never happened at all. If you hear an eyewitness testifying at trial, even if they say, I'm 100% sure, I've worked on cases where they've said, I'm 200% sure, which is fun for those of us that care about math. When it comes to confidence at trial, please be wary, because by the time an eyewitness gets to the trial, their confidence has had the chance to grow.
Ignacio Sarmiento is an associate professor in the Department of Central American and Transborder Studies at the California State University, Northridge. He recently published his first book, Specters of War, The Battle of Mourning in Post-Conflict Central America, which explores the ongoing conflict over the work of mourning in contemporary El Salvador and Guatemala. And the title of the talk is When Mourning Becomes Political, The Case of Central America.
Two of the most brutal civil wars in Latin history finally ended. In 1992, there was a peace accord between the Salvadoran guerrilla and the Salvadoran government that put an end to a 12 years civil war. Combined, the civil wars in El Salvador and Guatemala left a death toll close to 300,000 people, and millions were displaced, many of whom relocated here to the Los Angeles area. So if you didn't know, that's why there is such a big Central American population here in LA. I'm going to keep talking later why it has kept growing. And this is precisely what I want to talk about today, loss, and how communities in post-war Central America have been dealing with grief in the decades following the end of the civil wars. Grief is something that most of us may know something about. Probably many of us have experienced our own losses at different moments in our lives, but the focus of my talk today is not just about losses or grief in general. Instead, the work of mourning has been instrumental in the creation, reproduction, and preservation of dominant discourses of national communities and national identities in many parts of the world. When the civil wars ended in El Salvador in 1992, the guerrilla group became a political party. And for the next 20 plus years, they shared the political power with the right-wing party they were fighting during the war. Salvadoran Congress, in a matter of days, decided to pass an amnesty law that would make it impossible to prosecute any crime committed during the war. As a result, the over 20,000 victims.
Dr. Philip A. Vieira received his PhD from UC Riverside, where he studied systems neuroscience. As a full professor of psychology at CSU Dominguez Hills, the title of his talk is Debunking Dopamine.
A student of B.F. Skinner, one of the fathers of behaviorism, known as James Olds, decided to do something very revolutionary. He was going to implant an electrode, a thin metal wire, into the brains of rats and allow them to press a lever and it would stimulate that area of their brain. He kept hitting that lever over and over and over and over again. Some rats that were pushing that lever hundreds, thousands of times. Yeah, they would forego food, sleep. They just wanted to hit that lever. And so you can imagine at this time, during our understanding of behavior and the brain, the researchers at the time thought, like, we found the pleasure center. And thus began the myth of dopamine as the pleasure molecule. It seemed like they were almost compelled to do it. They didn't really seem like they were enjoying it. They just felt like they had to keep pressing this lever. Started to see dopamine less as a pleasure molecule and more as a molecule, a neurotransmitter involved in motivation and learning, in predicting reward. And researchers later discovered that you see levels of dopamine increase when something novel happens, something new. It's involved in lots of different things, actually. So it's involved in movement. A lot of people who are familiar with the diseases like Parkinson's, we know that dopamine plays a big role there, with memory, with learning. You have much less control over the neurotransmitters in your brain than you think you do. But the reality is that we have very little control of control of our neurotransmitters, of dopamine. Don't focus on dopamine per se, but focus on the environment, the learning situation, the things that are driving that behavior.